Hello and welcome to the UnWokable podcast. I am your host, Mark Owsley, and I'm joined today by Ms. Kelly Skye, who is a researcher extraordinaire from California, who is going to give us some insight into some concerning things she found in the state of Oklahoma concerning a new program joining health and education. So Kelly, how are you? How are you doing
I'm
today?
doing well. Glad to be here.
Thank you so much for being here. So first question. What is this new program, joining health and education, and why should we be concerned about it?
So this started quite a while ago, but back in 2007, the Centers for Disease Control and an organization called ASCD, which was formerly the Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development. The two of them joined together to combine health and education for the purpose of equity. That's a popular word being used.
Yes.
And very concerning in the sense of combining health and education, what that means, taxpayer funding, what these new school models will look like, and what this means for families and parents. There's a lot of questions to ask. These particular models are making their way, being implemented all across the nation, but at various stages. And the concern is that we have an ideology making its way across the nation in diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. And that is really an idea system that this ASCD organization is really embracing. And the CDC joining with them then to roll out this plan, which is actually on their website with a virtual school. When parents look at this, it's marketed very well in the sense of it looks like school beautification, more services, help for kids. It's marketed in a really compassionate way. And at the same time, there's a lot that is part of this program that many may fail to recognize.
Okay.
As far as, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. But so like diversity, equity, and inclusion, which you and I have been a part of a few podcasts where we've discussed that issue specifically. WISC and first of all, so this is known as WISC, correct? Or that's the acronym?
Yeah.
Okay. What is WISC?
Yeah.
What does WISC stand for?
It's the whole school, whole community, whole child model. And so then it's WSCC.
Okay.
Yeah, pronounced WISC.
Mm-hmm. Right, but that's the way they pronounce it. So, but
right.
Like diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? They're hiding a lot of bad in a big bed of good, right? So the way I've kind of talked about it is that you got a big beautiful bouquet of flowers, but right underneath there's a big mess of thorns, right? And that's kind of what you're saying is kind of hidden in this very well marketed, very well promoted, and some good things are in there. School beautification, good thing, right? Going towards the general health of students while in the classroom, something most people can agree with. But as in everything, the devil's in the details, right? So you said over the country, this has been implemented in various stages. Obviously, in Oklahoma, it appears to be at the beginning stages. Is that what you found?
Yes, that's what it looks like.
Okay, so because this is billed on the website as the second annual, and what we're talking about here for my audience is that there's a conference joining together. We are not sure. There's some speculation as to whether or not it has happened or is happening, because today would be the second day. But, and we'll get to this a little later, we're going to operate right now as if it is, and we'll show you why later. But it's in combination with a lot of different organizations, including the University of Central Oklahoma and the State Department of Health and the State Department of Education. Okay, so, but I want, since it's been implemented across the country at varying levels, what have you seen this type of program do in a state that is much further along than Oklahoma? What are the concerns that are being implemented? What causes you concern about the things being implemented in those states where it's much further along?
Right. And there are community schools throughout the US, but they have not reached yet their full intended fruition. And so if somebody's listening and they say, well, I've seen a community school in my neighborhood and it's not doing any of that, just keep in mind it's a model of progression. And California is actually really vamping up efforts to implement this. There's already $3 billion budgeted to grant to various school districts. They basically, there's a group of organizations that want every school to be a community school. And so $3 billion is now occurring in California, but the governor just announced that he's hoping to bring forth another $1.5 billion towards furthering community schools. And community schools, according to the Centers for Disease Control website, will have health clinics on site, or wellness clinics, they may call them, dental, keeping the child's medical records, also psychology or counseling, social workers. A lot of what they're planning to do is very concerning, because where are parents?
Yes, well, this sounds very much like a college campus nowadays, right? And so I think over the last 20 to 30 years, there has been this concerted effort, mostly funded honestly by student loan money and rising tuition rates, of building a kind of fenced-in community built around an education system, but that provides healthcare and psychological care and dental care, and you'll have health clinics, and this makes some sense, especially the way it's been vamped up in universities, right? Because the case was made that you would have students who are kind of adults but kind of not, right? They may still be supported in many ways by the parents. They may be independent but not able to work because of their school load. So you've got meal plans and you've got all of those benefits to offer those young adults. But what you're saying here is that community schools is a effort to recreate that kind of ecosystem in a K through 12 school?
Correct, PK through 12, and they're hoping to have universal pre-kindergarten. That's also occurring in California. And here in California, we hear cradle to college and career a lot. And that's a subject of supporting those needs according to a certain ideology of what those needs are and how they're implemented and provided for. That's part of this plan, at least in the state of California, for sure. And I would say right now it's very telling. There's a conference occurring in Los Angeles today, yesterday, and tomorrow. And the conference is called the National Community Schools and Family Engagement Conference. There's a lot of topics of concern that those promoting community schools, which you may also hear as healthy schools. So they may call it either one, but some of the sessions for this particular conference, and they have school teachers, school staff attending from out of state. So there's people all over the US who are going to Los Angeles and attending this right now. Just one example is driven by equity, reimagining engagement and innovation in building a student-centered, culturally responsive school. So that's just one session.
So these two events, if this is happening right now in Oklahoma, they're happening at the same time. They could be teleconferencing in people from That's just speculation, but these two events happening at the same time, they are connected. And, you know, much like I think we've seen in other trainings, I was a teacher for years, and you would sometimes have other presentations teleconferenced in that were happening at other times, or just recordings of them, right? But I think it's interesting, the timing that this is, but beyond that, that's kind of speculative, but beyond that, the interest here is, I'm assuming we're talking about health equity, right? Let's unpack that for a second. So health equity, let's just talk about in terms of the recent pandemic. And I don't want to watch my language here because of the YouTube censors, but in terms of the recent pandemic, health equity often manifests itself by saying one group of people would get a vaccination or along the lines because of the color of their skin over another. That's one example of health equity, right? And obviously this presents a lot of concern for everyone. I think it should, because doling out medical care based upon immutable qualities that are not explicitly medical poses a problem. Because if someone is more at risk, but the color of their skin is not correct, they should have gotten it based upon their actual medical need. That's a problem if you don't give it to them first, right? Say they're elderly, for example, right? What other ways have you seen that health equity in this context can be a problem? Like what that concern you in this context? What do they mean when they're talking about health equity in a community schools system?
I would say at a time when words are being redefined and definitions and phrases are being added to, health is now a loaded term in and of itself. And
Okay.
what equates to health and also mental health. And then I would say equity, part of my greatest concern with regards to health equity is that I'm seeing outside of this model many groups and individuals that are referring to health equity as also gender affirming care, and not just applying to consenting adults. There are activists and organizations that want a gender affirmative model established as that's the standard of care. And here in the state of California, students in middle school can already leave campus without the consent or knowledge of their parents, go to a Planned Parenthood facility, obtain birth control or an abortion, and then that all occurs outside of the parents' knowledge or consent. But foster children in the state of California can already obtain gender affirming hormone therapy without a legal guardian's basically it is a gender affirmative only model right now for certain foster youth. And then the state of Washington has already established gender affirmative models for students. And so the direction that we're moving with that, while also moving in the direction of establishing health and wellness clinics on every school site, is a concern, because the question is, what is health equity, and where does that take us?
Right. So when you say children, is there an age limit? Is it children 10 and up? Is it 5 and up? Is there any limit at all?
That will be something that will be very interesting to see how this progresses. I know, for example, the students in California, it is age, I believe it's age 12 or 13 where they can leave campus.
Where they can leave campus, but what about the gender affirming? So you said for students who are orphaned or wards of the state.
Foster, yeah.
So they can. Do you know that there's an age limit when they can go seek hormone therapy and independently, or is is the age limit the same across for hormone therapy specifically? For gender affirming care, because that's what they mean, right? When let's just, when they're talking about gender affirming care, they're saying, first of all, they have a right to psychological care under their terms. So if they think that they're a certain gender affirming means that the psychologist is duty bound by the law, right, to affirm their care, meaning that they must not challenge their preconceived notion about their gender identity. They must affirm it. And then after that comes a specific set of actions that the child themselves can choose, independent of their parents, to affirm their care, which can include going into a certain bathroom if they want, that's one, right? Or can go to saying, I need hormone therapy, and then receiving that hormone therapy, or even medical, surgical changes by a doctor. Is all of that correct? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
That is, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I believe the bill text is, I think it's Assembly Bill 2119 here in California.
Okay. Well, and that should be very concerning for everyone, because as I often say, progressivism progresses. And the advantage we have here, we are in Oklahoma, and Kelly rightfully, and thank you so much, scouring the internet as she does, found this in the state of Oklahoma and called me and said, hey, Mark, do you know about this? And I said, no, I don't. And because progressivism progresses, if they're starting it out right now, the goal is to get where California is right now in terms of parental consent, right? So that should be very concerning for everyone. And whether that age is 10 or 13 or anything under 18 for that matter, it should be very, very concerning. And at least in Oklahoma, we are at the point where we can do something to stop it, because it's in its beginning stages. Kelly, you brought up some, you have some websites that stuff that you had sent me. Do you want to kind of just take us through what is on the website, translate for us what these things mean, so we can give the audience some visuals so they can do their best to understand the bad hiding in the bed of good, so to speak.
Right. And I will just confirm, it was that Assembly Bill that I shared just a moment ago, and it's for foster youth ages 12 and up.
12.
And then in that that dates back to August 27th, 2018 in California. And then in the fall of 2019, our biggest teachers union in the state is the California Teachers Association, or CTA. And they had written in and passed in their June 1st to 2nd meeting notes for their State Council of Education that they want to advocate for minors, ages the same age, to be able to obtain gender affirming hormone therapy without the barrier of parental permission. And that's the direction that we're headed as things progress.
Without the barrier of parental permission.
Correct. That's an exact quote from their page.
Okay, well, you can't make it much more plain than that. I'm reminded of the book that was put out by Hillary Clinton many years ago. It Takes a Village. They seem to be trying to build the village and remove the parents from it. Would that be a general statement that of what we're seeing here?
Yes, and that actually that is some of the marketing for community schools. It takes a village.
Oh, okay. But they want to create a village, but remove the barrier of parental consent. Just
Permission. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, let's dive into this. So let's go ahead and jump. now that everybody has the context, we're going to go through some of the details of what Kelly has seen on and this is the State Department of Health for Oklahoma. It at one point was up on the State Department of Education for Oklahoma, but in the last day, that link was broken, correct? Because just a few days ago, you found this information on the State Department of Education website?
This, I believe it was actually here,
Okay,
oklahoma.gov, right?
okay, oklahoma.gov, okay,
Yes,
okay. But up at the left-hand corner, it says the State Department of Health.
right.
Okay,
That's correct.
but this is in partnership with the State Department of Education, at least on some
Yes.
capacity. Okay, and we can see
Yes,
that.
it
some-
says it right here to support the rollout of the Health Education Act, which will go into effect the 2023 to 2024 school year. The Oklahoma State Department of Education and Oklahoma State Department of Health are excited to host the second annual WSC Institute Understanding and Implementing Health Education in Oklahoma.
Okay, so
Right.
although there may be some concerns, I just want to address this now. So I have a source that's fairly involved in this in the government that has said that there might be some issue or it may not be happening because of something that happened with the State Department of Ed. On March 24th, there was a vote by the State Department of Education that voted down 2 of the stipulations involved in this rollout of the Health Education Act. So the legislature passed the Health Education Act, and it's supposed to be implemented in 2013-2014 school year. And last year, in June, they held their first annual conference. And this year, in June, they were set to have or are having maybe their second annual conference to prepare for the rollout that would happen in the 2023-2024 school year. But the State Department of Education, according to my source, said that 2 of the stipulations at least were voted down, and that the State Superintendent of Education, Joy Hoffmeister, had petitioned or received some sort of federal money to help move this along. And that's what I wanted to say. This Health Education Act, is that through the federal government or is that through the state government?
This is, you can actually click on that hyperlink and it takes you to the Oklahoma State Courts Network. So this is specifically referring to the state.
The state, so this is a state, the legislature passed it, the governor signed it and approved it. So now there was a barrier in Oklahoma. You have, especially when it comes to schools, okay, you have the legislature, and then it goes into basically a bureaucratic process where you have a state board of education, the state superintendent. The state board can then vote and take up the actual actionable policies of how this thing will be implemented per what was written by the state department or the state legislature and signed by the governor. So my source said that the State Department of Ed at that point voted on 2 stipulations. They voted them down. The state superintendent, Joy Hoffmeister, abstained. And I want to get this very correct. She did not just abstain. She refused to vote. The secretary of when taking this vote, well, no, I don't want to speak out of turn. Basically, it did not pass these 2 stipulations, okay? And because I might be confusing 2 specific things, and I just want to be upfront about that. But this passed the legislature, so it was set to go in. There's already been 1 annual conference. We have some evidence to show that the second annual conference happened yesterday and today. Okay, Kelly, is there anything here you want to show us on this page other than what we've covered?
Probably not that page.
Okay.
This particular page here from the Health Division of Oklahoma.gov, it does state who was supposedly trained to roll out this health program according to at least what's still live on their website: teams and individuals, school wellness teams, school administrators, health and physical education teachers, school counselors, nurses, community health educators, will learn about the CDC's whole school, whole community, whole child model and how it creates environments where a child feels safe. That is a key for people to pay attention to, is how do they define what feeling safe means, and how does that change the school atmosphere and environment and socialization. And then they said engaged, supported, challenged, and healthy. And what defines healthy, and
Right.
what are healthy youth? Yeah.
And what is
So
supported? So
right.
all of these terms, and that's what we're finding through this whole model and these whole kind of situations. Let's use what you've heard on this channel a lot, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Equity, and it sounds very much like equality, and so I'm just using this as an example. But what it means is creating using discrimination to create equal outcomes on the front end, or on the back end, by discriminating against people on the front end through policy, through institutional policy. So when we're talking about health and when we're talking about safety, right? If you don't feel safe because certain words are used on campus, or on the campus of a K through 12 school, that could be, it has been applied to everything from liberty. The word liberty has been deemed unsafe in some situations. Various words that might offend someone, in the context of education, whether it's read in a book out loud to a class, it's gotten people fired because words have been defined as violence, in many cases, that if you say something that offends me, that could hurt me. So let's take that over one more step to gender affirming care, right? If you have gender affirming care as a baseline, and somebody at home says, no son, no daughter, I don't believe you're a boy or a girl, if you're the opposite sex, you know what I mean? They could then go to one of these apparatuses at the whole community, whole school, go to the doctor, go to the psychologist that will be present on the whole community school, say, I feel unsafe because my parent told me that I am not what I think I am. And then what happens, Kelly? Then what happens?
Right. Well, and other concerns, you just keyed in on something that I have noticed on the Centers for Disease Control's website, which is part of this model built in, where they do say that they want to stop violence before it occurs. And that's from the Centers for Disease Control. And then they have categories for a variety of, violent acts.
Okay.
And it does talk about bullying. So that's important. And then the second part that I have been noticing is that the community schools talks about family engagement, and it's always last. Family engagement is always the last thing on the list between all of these new programs that they plan to implement. But what I also am seeing is, instead of parent-teacher conferences, or in addition to parent-teacher conferences, there's home visits. There's a
Home
lot
visits.
of promotion for home visits, correct? And why does the government need to be in a child's home?
That's a great
Mhm,
question.
mhm.
Why? So when they say, do they define home visits? Do they talk about what is involved in a home visit?
Well, I have not seen what it all entails. I know it's being discussed in one of the presentations at this Los Angeles conference.
Okay.
And from what I've seen, I believe there's at least one organization that specializes in these home visits as well
Okay. And
and promotes them.
okay. And so in the context where I've seen home visits is through the apparatuses in any state where you would have a concern for the child's physical well-being, right?
Right.
I'm blanking on it right now because I'm trying to think of it, but it's, just basically health, child services is a good way to kind of, each state has a
Oh, yeah,
child
Child
service.
Protective Services.
Yeah,
Mhm.
child protective services, right? And again, progressivism progresses. So when child protective services was kind of first rolled out, there was a substantial pushback to that in many parts of the country, years and years ago, because of the concern that the government would then take that and take it a step further and maybe over the course of time apply it to children who didn't need it, right?
Right.
And we all recognize that there are broken homes and that there are abusive situations that happen in homes. I personally came from a broken, abusive home, but that I was the exception, not the rule. And I
Mhm.
believe that's still the case. But what you're saying here is that if you have a child, say you're a perfectly normal, um, working family that may have its share of conflicts, as any family does, but there's no abuse, there's no um, physical abuse, especially. Let's take that a hypothetical. That if you're involved in a community school, that it would be a pro forma action to have a home visit for the school to check and make sure that is the case. Is that what is happening
It
here?
Well, it causes a lot of questions. And that's where I'm at. I'm at that questioning phase. Why would the government need to be in somebody's home? What would it be for? Would it be for every family and every child? And what do they look like? And what's the real purpose
Mhm.
behind them? And I'm not buying that it's just family engagement when I see what's already happening here in California with health and education. And I mean, there's an age where your child here in California, you have to ask for permission to see their medical records. You have to ask your child for permission at a certain age. And do they plan to just further that along? Will it get, right now it's a middle school age child, but when will that then be applied to younger ages? And at what point, what is happening? But that what I see is an erosion of parental rights, an erosion of parental involvement. Um, I'll never forget in January of 2020, I was sitting in Sacramento at a Senate Education Committee hearing, and there was a bill on transparency that was being heard and discussed and voted upon. It was voted down, but it was about transparency, particularly with the comprehensive sexuality education and pertaining specifically to younger grades who might be receiving this. We call it CSE for short. But there was a man, a politician, who sat on this committee, and he said essentially, parents, I'm glad you're here, but you need to stay engaged
Mhm.
because the people in this room want to make decisions. They want to stand between you and your child's doctor, you and the school system. And if you don't stay engaged, you're going to lose the ability to parent your child. And I think he was really trying to wake us up in that moment.
Yeah. Well, and the
Hmm.
best predictor of future behavior is past behavior, and especially when we were talking about the government and complex systems. And we've already seen how the CDC can in tangle itself into the everyday lives of Americans, beyond what the United States Supreme Court has deemed legal. Um, and we've seen that the Biden administration specifically has enabled that, even to the point of saying the president saying, you know what, I know this is unconstitutional, but I'm going to do it now because I know it's going to take a long time for it to get through the courts. And then by that time, the effect is accomplished, so to speak, in many ways. And so say anybody can have any opinions on what they want about the efficacy of the CDC in general and whether or not the pandemic was dealt with correctly or the measures taken were necessary. But I don't think anyone can argue that based upon legal fact, they went above and beyond their legal mode of operation per the United States Supreme Court, right? And so now you take that mode of operation, you apply it to a school setting, because all of this, as you said, and I just correct me if I'm wrong, is being handed down from the CDC to state departments of health and education to implement this whole school model, correct?
Correct.
Okay, well, parents, you've got to call the State Department of Education, you've got to call the State Department of Health, and you must most assuredly call the governor, Governor Kevin Stitt, to find out what is going on here. Because as Kelly said, we have an issue of the government trying to lay the foundations of an apparatus that seeks to, in its own words, remove the barrier of parental permission, at least when it comes to gender affirming care. We have seen that already in Canada. And I often believe, Kelly, I often believe that Canada is our little Rosetta Stone. So Oklahoma can look to California as going, okay, this is what's going to happen in the future, but California can look to Canada. And we've already seen many times, there have been instances in California or in Canada where parents have been jailed, put in jail, charged with crimes, and given fines for denying a child's spoken gender identity. Is that what you fear here, Kelly? Is that what you fear we're moving towards?
I think that's the direction we're absolutely moving towards. Here in California, it's getting more hostile, and what teachers are being told to do. Just school districts, for example, they have forms that parents are not parents, but schools can fill out with a student, and these forms give a long list of what name or what pronoun to use in this setting, and what name and what pronoun to use in this setting. And so teachers are having to remember through this school paperwork, okay, when I talk to this parent, I'm using this name and this pronoun. Maybe it's their name, their birth name. And then we've got this other name that we use in these other settings. And schools are wanting to go ahead, and we already have pretty frequently in the state of California school districts that will help a student change their records, their school records, that have listed everything since they were young, and
Change
teachers
them
go
how?
through. So all of your permanent records that have been established from the school system up until whatever age they may be at, changing all of those.
Like to reflect the child's stated gender
New identity. Correct.
and they don't have to tell the parents about that?
No, actually, school districts often are training to not tell parents.
And the reason for that, correct me if I'm wrong, is
right. This is family
safety.
Engagement, right?
Right. Well, yes, but the reason that they give for being able to do that is out of safety. Correct? Like, because you could have a parent that doesn't accept or affirm the child's gender identity. So that is their definition, at the moment at least, of the child being unsafe. And so the school justifies they're keeping this information, these decisions the child is making, by saying, well, they're not safe at home and not safe to tell the parent. And if they did, they could be put in physical danger. Correct?
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, now that you say that, I think I have something, if I can show it to you.
Yes.
Says
Okay.
I'm here.
Okay.
And on the back, it's the NEA LGBTQ+ caucus.
Okay.
It shows some partnerships. When you open it up, this is for staff to wear at school. It's a little badge
Okay.
with the back looking very similar.
Uh-huh.
There's a disclaimer here, and it says links, resources, referrals to other organizations does not constitute an endorsement by the NEA LGBTQ plus caucus. All copyrights belong to their respective organization, but key in on this. It states if you are not a safe person or do not support LGBTQ plus youth or issues, please do not wear or display the I'm Here badge.
Okay. So they're handing out QR code scannable identity markers, badges for
Mhm.
students and teachers.
For teachers.
Oh, it's for teachers to wear,
Mhm.
so children or students can identify them, I'm assuming, at least in some way, shape, or form. So they know who to share their hidden identities with, at least in some capacity. What is the purpose of the badge?
It states, we are excited that you are willing to partner with the NEA LGBTQ plus caucus by wearing your I'm Here badge. By wearing our badge, you tell everyone that you are a safe person to discuss LGBTQ plus issues. Affirming LGBTQ plus youth couldn't be easier than by identifying yourself as a safe and supportive person. And then it continues on. And then it offers that you could have them customized with your specific group's logo and info. But this aligns a group of people as safe. And then it specifically says if you are not a safe person. So who is now determined as safe and who is unsafe? And if this is the new standard in education, then we have to ask ourselves if that standard is expanded through the community schooling model, what will that entail?
Right, especially if you have psychologists and medical records housed on campus, which is the WSC model, right? They want to have psychologists, actual medical doctors, not just school nurses, right, but medical doctors who, in theory, would be able to prescribe medications or hormone therapy or drugs on campus to your child without your permission, without the parental permission. That's to remove the barrier of parental permission from that process. And now, as we've seen, you just showed us, a badge that can identify. So this brings us to the word inclusion, because the legal meaning of the word inclusion automatically caveats an exclusion of something else. Like, and I'm blanking on the Latin right now, which my teachers would smack me because I sing a lot of Latin, but it's the implication is that if you include something, you exclude something else. On that badge, it says, please do not wear this if you do not align with these values specific, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm sorry, it's kind of shocking, and I think everyone should be shocked, because
Incredibly shocking.
we've seen this kind of thing before in history, you know, and without getting too much into what YouTube will censor, we've seen the identification markings. They can be negative or positive, right? You can put a marking on somebody and identify them as a good thing, or you can put a marking on somebody as identify them as a bad thing. But either way, it excludes the person who's not in that group, which is the goal. Kelly,
We have conformity and control really driving this, as we've seen already happening in education. Conformity and control wrapped in a little package of claiming to be diverse, claiming to be inclusive and equitable, while so much is being hidden from the public. So much is being marketed to the public by
Mhm.
even, major organizations like the CDC. Content is being marketed. They have a virtual healthy or community school that is very much like a video game. It's interactive and you can go into the various rooms and engage with these. But what I'm witnessing here is you either embrace this and wear the badge, or I've heard of teachers reporting to me that there's students that will approach teachers and ask for the teacher to display a poster. And these students are likely encouraged from the club that they're at, and the poster might be related to something to do with either culture or LGBTQ plus. And the teacher's now put in a position to either accept the poster and display it, or have to explain to the students why they choose not to display the poster. Whether it says they're a safe person or whether it's something to do with the color of skin and, those topics. There's a whole range of these issues happening in schools. And then what happens is, if the teacher is put in a position where they choose not to conform, they're now put in this awkward, uncomfortable situation. Where is the student going to, cause conflict with me, with my job? I've had teachers that right after Biden and Harris were inaugurated, an entire school decided to have a dress up day to support the inauguration based on Kamala Harris. And teachers that don't participate, are left out. So these kinds of things are just ramping up.
Well, and I'm going to respect Kelly's time here. And is there first before, is there anything else in the website that you wanted to show us that we should pay special attention to? Or in
Well,
any
yes,
other of the
actually.
materials?
Yeah. So this particular bottom half, I'll just go through kind of quick. The ASCD and the CDC are listed as general resources. We have the partners listed over here. UCO was the university that was mentioned there in Oklahoma. It's all about kids. Their Twitter account is the one that on, I believe, April 18th had promoted this June 1st to 2nd event. We have the Oklahoma State Department of Ed, Health at School. All of these are worthwhile looking into. And then all of these links, Oklahoma ESSA, the implementation guide, all of these things. This is the logo for the whole school, whole community, whole child model.
Okay.
And then these,
Go
ahead, sorry.
No, I won't. You finish what you were saying, but I want to take a look at that graphic at the end, just to
Sure.
go through.
These are the different categories. And so family engagements here towards the bottom, and then community involvement. A lot of people will tell me, well, Kelly, my kids are homeschooled or they're grown, so I don't have to worry about this. The goal is the whole child education model, which is a research topic in and of itself, and then implemented through the whole school. And then the goal is to partner with organizations in the community to then support this model. Who those organizations will be is an important topic in itself. And the goal is to really also bring about community organizing through this, and not just for adults, but for students. So I can bring this back up. Here's the logo.
Real quick. So could that organization say be Google? Honestly, like if they were to support part of that, they could fund it, they could provide resources. Especially if it was a school choice school or private school, they would have the option to do that, right? So and then other obvious organizations that are devoted to this kind of thing, right? That may be nonprofits or for-profit organizations. Is that what you mean by organizations?
Well, so here in California, there's a document put out by UCLA, And in that document, for example, one of the community partnerships that it suggests could be a partnership is Planned Parenthood. So that's just one example. It also lists the YMCA and other organizations, but really each individual school district will be able to decide, just the same way they decide curriculum, who they'll pair with, who they'll contract with for the fulfillment of these community related activities. And it could also be organizations that bring about restorative justice, which is a topic in and of itself. It could be organizations that promote student activism in a variety of ways. That's important to be aware of. And then there's a couple other websites. I don't know if you want me to get into those or not, but
yeah, so go ahead and just show us what you think is important for us to see.
Okay. So right here is a PDF document. It's 26 pages long. This also I got from Oklahoma, and it once again talks about all of their partners, and the logos are there. Schools for Healthy Lifestyles, TSET, Oklahoma, OKC County. I don't know what OKC is because I don't live there.
Was that the State Department of Ed logo right there? I can't, it's to the left underneath.
There's this one.
No, that's the Department of Health, but over to the left, right above the one at the bottom. Yeah, is that? I can't read it.
This one is the Oklahoma State Department of Education.
Okay, just wanted to make sure that we had those identified. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So these are all the organizations that are involved. Okay.
So this is a lot of information throughout. Talks. This is almost like a marketing model, because what they seek to do, they being the top leaders promoting this model, is capture the teachers and school staff with marketing this to them so they can get buy-in and support, and then those school staff then bring it, and so it's a top-down model essentially. They often will say, even social emotional learning, a lot of the claims will say, well, it's due to neuroscience. And we found here in California, they've even said that students need ethnic studies because they perform better. And what I'm seeing is a trend in education where we see content like this, and they'll say that their new program is rooted in some form of science, or it shows positive outcomes. And, you could do that about coffee. You could say drinking coffee has a positive outcome, so we need to drink more coffee. But you could also probably do a study to the alternative and say, well, coffee doesn't, really benefit us. But I tend to take these studies promoting curricular materials or programs in education a bit cautiously, because I've seen flawed research. There's a lot of resources here as far as different standards and plans. They're really wanting health education in Oklahoma, and the ultimate goal really for the nation right now is there's many groups working to get comprehensive sexuality education, a requirement nationwide. That is the end game.
Okay,
So,
real quick. So let's just so California is much further along the road when it comes to comprehensive sex education. What is that? How does that manifest itself in California? What are the kinds of things you see from comprehensive sex education?
As of 2018 specifically, it became law, and it was required once in middle school, once in high school. It was allowed for each individual school district to then implement it to any additional grades that they wanted. Parents can opt out of this particular teaching, but parents in the state of California cannot opt out anymore from any teaching in any class that pertains to sexual orientation, gender identity. So that can be also labeled SOGI for short. And that teaching is also making its way, specifically SOGI, which is a part of sex education, sexuality education, into a plethora of other subjects. When this became law, it had already been taught in schools prior to being required by the state. Many school districts were already implementing similar sexuality education, but now that it became law in 2016 and implementation was required in 2018, we have a completely different sex education. Basically, sex ed began as human reproduction biology science. It changed over time into protection and birth control and safety methods. But now it is about young people having a right to sexual pleasure. And built into the program is the teaching of pleasure and eroticism. And that's a big topic, but essentially comprehensive sexuality education is a completely different ideology.
Okay, so, but I just want to point this out for everybody watching, especially here in the state of Oklahoma. Progressivism progresses. And what Kelly is telling us about right now, everyone here in Oklahoma that's pushing this will go, oh, you're being crazy. You just don't want kids to be able to say if they're being abused at home, or you don't want them to learn about safe sex because you're a dinosaur that says, you know, abstinence only. That's what they're going to hit you with now. That's what the fight was in California 20 years ago or before that. But progressivism progresses. And where California is right now, and everything that Kelly just described, they're teaching kids the basics of pleasure in school classrooms through their teachers. That's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to say, because I think that's enough. And parents, go ahead.
I was going to add, when people are hearing in the news media, that there's drag queens at schools or really graphic books or really graphic curriculum, the goal from everything that I've seen is to encourage sexual exploration and to encourage pleasure. And each district and each teacher may implement this differently here in the state, but we've absolutely seen it on the extreme, and we've seen it where teachers are trying to, just get by with what the state is requiring and get that over and done with. But exactly as you said, it progresses, and the goal is to mandate this in K through 12, that this would be the new standard. And that's what organizations like SIECUS, SIECUS.org, are working on. They believe that sex ed is a vehicle for social change, and sex ed is a vehicle for racial justice.
Okay, so what is this?
Okay, so this is a slideshow I found also in Oklahoma, and it takes you through the whole school, whole community, whole child, again, the WSCC model, and says there's a pre-survey. Perhaps this was used at some point for training teachers. I'm not sure, but it does show a video here, and then it talks about this healthy, safe, engaged, supported, and challenged, plus this coordinated school health plan equals this community school plan.
Okay.
And so talks about counseling, psychological and social services, health promotions for staff, PE, health education, health services, nutrition, healthy school environment. And what does that mean? And then family and community involvement. This is where it talks about WSCC being an ecological approach, and it talks about the individual. Interpersonal is the next, organizational. This is really important to pay attention to. You've got individual knowledge, attitude, beliefs, interpersonal being provider, family, peers, social networks, and then organizational healthcare systems, academic medical institutions. But then right here, we've got, community-based organizations. This is where it talks about health insurance plans, public and private, state and local health departments working as part of this model. And then the community, coalitions, health disparity collaboratives. This is for tribal health departments, research institutions, media, anyways.
Oh, hold on. So this right here, this is very interesting, and I want to show real quick. This is from the Norman Public Schools DEI teacher training. Okay, this is a primer for what we just saw. It talks about spheres of influence and spheres of control that teachers can implement, and this is designed to work outward, right? If you notice, just look at the shape and just look at what we're talking about here. So you've got a sphere of equity control and a sphere of equity influence, okay? And this is what teachers are used to say, okay, here's my ideology, here are my classroom procedures. That's what's in your sphere of equity control. This, your student handbook and policy, is your sphere of equity influence, right? Let's go back and look at what Kelly I'm going to stop sharing. Kelly, go ahead and share that again.
And this is based particularly on what is called the social ecological model theory.
Right.
But it does look very similar to what you just shared.
And it has the same aspects: individual, knowledge, attitude, and beliefs. What's another word that you can describe knowledge, attitude, and beliefs? Ideology, which is what we just saw, right? So I'm connecting right now the DEI equity teaching for equity training model to what Oklahoma is now using with the community schools model and expanding outward. But it also, another word for policy, right? They even say it in the last one, that out of your sphere of influence is the school policies, right? This is the same model. So this is, you've got the organizational, the community, and then policy. But this is you, and this is you using those things to influence everything outward. They call this spheres of influence. And this is directly so when there are some people who would say that, well, the gender issue and racial justice are not necessarily coincided, the methods aren't the same. I agree that CRT is maybe identity Marxism, but this is obviously, they're just trying to make schools better. This is the exact same thing. This is the ecological approach in both. The other is just a primer to get them ready for this. The other was presented to teachers in 2021. We're now in 2022, and they're bridging it outward. And this is through your offices of diversity, equity, and inclusion that are pushing this on your teachers. So these are all organizations that
right.
Okay.
So this is a lot of information throughout. Talks. This is almost like a marketing model, because what they seek to do, they being the top leaders promoting this model, is capture the teachers and school staff with marketing this to them so they can get buy-in and support, and then those school staff then bring it. And so it's a top-down model, essentially. They often will say, even social emotional learning, a lot of the claims will say, well, it's due to neuroscience. And we found here in California, they've even said that students need ethnic studies because they perform better. And what I'm seeing is a trend in education where we see content like this, and they'll say that their new program is rooted in some form of science, or it shows positive outcomes. And, you could do that about coffee. You could say drinking coffee has a positive outcome, so we need to drink more coffee. But you could also probably do a study to the alternative and say, well, coffee doesn't, really benefit us. But I tend to take these studies promoting curricular materials or programs in education a bit cautiously because I've seen flawed research. There's a lot of resources here as far as different standards and plans. They're really wanting health education in Oklahoma, and the ultimate goal really for the nation right now is there's many groups working to get comprehensive sexuality education, a requirement nationwide. That is the end game.
Okay,
So
real quick. So let's just so California is much further along the road when it comes to comprehensive sex education.
mhm.
What is that? How does that manifest itself in California? What are the kinds of things you see from comprehensive sex education?
As of 2018 specifically, it became law, and it was required once in middle school, once in high school. It was allowed for each individual school district to then implement it to any additional grades that they wanted. Parents can opt out of this particular teaching, but parents in the state of California cannot opt out anymore from any teaching in any class that pertains to sexual orientation, gender identity. So that can be also labeled SOGI for short. And that teaching is also making its way, specifically SOGI, which is a part of sex education, sexuality education, into a plethora of other subjects. When this became law, it had already been taught in schools prior to being required by the state. Many school districts were already implementing similar sexuality education, but now that it became law in 2016 and implementation was required in 2018, we have a completely different sex education. Basically, sex ed began as human reproduction biology science. It changed over time into protection and birth control and safety methods, but now it is about young people having a right to sexual pleasure, and built into the program is the teaching of pleasure and eroticism. And that's a big topic, but essentially comprehensive sexuality education is a completely different ideology.
Okay, so but I just want to point this out for everybody watching, especially here in the state of Oklahoma. Progressivism progresses, and what Kelly is telling us about right now, everyone here in Oklahoma that's pushing this will go, "Oh, you're being crazy. You just don't want kids to be able to say if they're being abused at home, or you don't want them to learn about safe sex because you're a dinosaur that says, abstinence only." That's what they're going to hit you with now. That's what the fight was in California 20 years ago or before that. But progressivism progresses, and where California is right now and everything that Kelly just described, they're teaching kids the basics of pleasure in school classrooms through their teachers. That's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to say, because I think that's enough. And parents, go ahead.
I was going to add, when people are hearing in the news media, that there's drag queens at schools or really graphic books or really graphic curriculum, the goal from everything that I've seen is to encourage sexual exploration and to encourage pleasure. And each district and each teacher may implement this differently here in the state, but we've absolutely seen it on the extreme, and we've seen it where teachers are trying to just get by with what the state is requiring and get that over and done with. But exactly as you said, it progresses, and the goal is to mandate this in K through 12, that this would be the new standard. And that's what organizations like SIECUS, SIECUS.org, are working on. They believe that sex ed is a vehicle for social change, and sex ed is a vehicle for racial justice.
So they unify these things, and this is where we need to highlight the fact that this is Marxist identitarianism, or as James Lindsay calls, identity Marxism. Because there are two modes here. You have the ideology, which is all based upon, they say it's about the way you look, that taking prominence. First thing, that's diversity, right? And to create equity between people who look different. But what they really mean is they don't really care how you look. They care about what you think. They care about what you agree with and what you don't. And so it's ethnocentric viewpoint discrimination. It's weaponizing the empathy of those whom their targets are, right? And using that ideology to weed out the people who might disagree. Then comes the praxis, right? Then comes the praxis, and that's what Kelly is talking about here, because the praxis is your kids, right? The praxis is your children, and that is to make them into shallow, hollow tools for a political ideology. They want to make them into activists for this mode of thinking. We've seen that here in the state of Oklahoma, where you have teachers leading kids in marches to protest the abortion decision, or the supposedly upcoming abortion decision. I don't care what you think about abortion. It doesn't matter to me. I think that's a giant distraction. The issue here is that you have teachers weaponizing children and walking them out of class during the day to protest a political stance as if it is morally good, the way they describe it, without any ifs, ands, or buts about it. Parents, we should be very, very alarmed about this. What Kelly is bringing us today, what she has showed us in Oklahoma, we still have a chance, and I think they might have a chance in California, but they have much less tools, much less support. To the governor, what are you doing? What are you doing? This is your state Department of Education. What to the legislature? Did you read this before you passed it? This is supposed to be the ruby red, the reddest state in America. We just banned abortion more than any other state in the country. And here we are letting in the back door the very mechanisms and ideology that are designed to take your kids from you. They don't need your guns if they have your children, Oklahoma. We can have all the 2A, and I'm speaking to my audience here because we have lots of issues about the gun situation right now. But your kids will take your guns from you in 20 years. Why? Because it will be tied to an ideology they learned in school that you let in the building. Kevin Stitt, Secretary of Education Ryan Walters, Brian Bobick, all the school board, every single legislator needs to start screaming from the rooftops. This cannot happen. If the health secretary, the State Department of Health secretary is implementing this, he needs to be fired. That's it. James, Lindsay, and I talked about this. And there just comes a point where it's just, you've got to say no. Kelly, thank you so much. Thank you so much for bringing us this information. If you want to support Kelly, because she does tireless work. She's working on this all the time. We communicate regularly. You can find her on Twitter at Kelly Sky, as you can see down there. She has a Substack, newly formed, or is being formed, right, Kelly?
I'm figuring it out.
Yes. Okay. Do you want to give us that?
Yeah.
Give us that title, or give us your address on that?
Sure. It's atimetostand.substack.com. Okay. And my website is atimetostand.me. And then my podcast is on Anchor, Spotify. It's A Time to Stand, because what I want to encourage every parent, politician out there is to not lose heart, to not lose hope, and that it absolutely is a time to stand. It's a time to get involved and get active and inform yourself, do your research, because when we have a word like health, if you're a politician and you're reading something, it might sound really good, but you really have to analyze and scrutinize what you're looking at before you pass something. This is worth much further investigation.
Yes, it very much is. Before we go real quick, there was a claim made by or a concern, or at least brought up to me by a government official, that we need that this might not be happening because of a vote that was taken by the State Board of Education on March 24th. I just want to share something real quick. This is a tweet from one of the partners, okay, that says, and the date is April 18th, 2022. So the State Board of Education voted to vote down whatever stipulations that might have stopped this from happening. But one of the partners on April 18th, almost a full month later, said that it was still happening and was promoting it. So I think we can say with at least some certainty that this is happening. And even if it didn't happen this time, right? It happened a year ago, because this is the second annual WSC National or WSC Program Joining Health. They use acronyms to to throw you off base, but Kelly very much explained what we're going through here and what parents need to know. So follow Kelly, support her. She deserves it. She has done so much work, and she's really sounded the alarm for us today on something that is very, very dangerous. It's very dangerous, and we need to do something about it. Thank you, Kelly, for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Mark.